After months of lyrical bloodshed, career-ending disses, and millions often picking sides, Drake, who once swore he'd never fold, is now begging Kendrick Lamar to end it. And I'm really sorry. I just like to honestly apologize. But why now? And what? Pushed him over the edge? I've got the full story. Let's dive in. Drake's desperate signals for peace. Drake is done with the feud. The transformation didn't happen overnight, and it certainly didn't come in the form of a traditional apology or public surrender. Instead, what we witnessed was something far more complex and arguably more fascinating. A gradual but undeniable shift in Drake's entire approach to the feud that had consumed both artists and dominated headlines throughout 2024 and into 2025. Through a careful analysis of his lyrics, public statements, social media presence, and strategic career moves, a pattern emerged that told a story of exhaustion, reflection, and ultimately, a desire to move beyond the conflict that had arguably damaged both artists' reputations. Should have known better. I'm sorry, man. And I'm really sorry. I just like to honestly apologize. The first major indication that Drake was ready to step back from the battlefield came in what many consider his final direct salvo in the war, The Heart Part 6, released on May 5, 2024. In this track, Drake delivered what appeared to be his concluding statement to the entire affair, rapping with a tone that suggested finality rather than continuation. The most telling lines came when he declared, "This is trauma from your own confessions. This when your father leave you home alone with no protection, son neglected. That's why these you so obsessed with. It's so excessive. They acting like it's so aggressive, but you just never known affection. I don't want to diss you anymore." This really got me second guessing. In another verse, he said, "You can drop 100 more records. I'll see you later." Yeah, maybe when you meet your maker, I don't want to fight with a woman beater. It feeds your nature. These weren't the words of someone preparing for another round. They were the words of someone stepping out of the ring entirely. What made these lyrics particularly significant was the way Drake framed high sex it rather than admitting defeat or acknowledging Kendrick's superiority. He positioned his withdrawal as taking the moral high ground. This track was Drake's final direct disc in the 2024 exchange, with the line suggesting he was bowing out, refusing to engage further with Lamar's. Allegations framed as moral high ground rather than defeat, implying the beef was over for him. It was a masterful piece of narrative construction that allowed Drake to exit the feud while maintaining his dignity and providing his fan base with a reason to support his decision. But the signals didn't stop there. As the months progressed and the dust began to settle from the initial explosive exchange, Drake's approach to addressing the feud became increasingly reflective and, more importantly, dismissive. By August 2024, we saw the emergence of content that revealed just how deeply the conflict had affected him personally. In a leaked track called No Face, released via his alternate Instagram account on August 23, 2024, Drake offered perhaps his most vulnerable and honest assessment of the entire situation. The lyrics from this leaked track were particularly revealing as Drake rap got lit off the features I skated on. I got to know how you get lit off the you hated on. The track served as both a confession and a strategic retreat, acknowledging that the feud had ultimately benefited his opponents while taking a personal toll on his own mental health and well-being. As we moved into 2025, Drake's signals became even more explicit and unmistakable. The clearest indication of his desire to move beyond the feud came with the release of Give Me a Hug from the collaborative project Dollars for You with Party Next Door on February 14, 2025. In this track, Drake delivered what amounted to a direct statement of his intentions. Rapping for rap beef. I'm trying to get the party lit. Trying to get the party lit for real. For real. This was an explicit dismissal of the feud, prioritizing Funan music over conflict. The timing of this release was particularly significant, coming shortly after Lamar's Super Bowl performance of Not Like Us, which many viewed as Kendrick's victory lap. Rather than responding with another diss track or escalating the conflict further, Drake chose to pivot entirely, focusing on positivity and entertainment rather than warfare. This pattern continued with additional releases in February 2025, where similar themes reinforced his desire to shift focus, with media outlets interpreting it as Drake's only viable strategy post-feud, avoiding direct retaliation. The consistency of this messaging across multiple tracks and projects indicated that this wasn't a momentary lapse or a single instance of weakness. It was a calculated and sustained strategic shift. Beyond his musical output, Drake's public statements and interviews during this period further reinforced the narrative of someone seeking to de-escalate and move forward. While he'd been relatively quiet in traditional interviews since the feud's peak, with no major outlets like Rolling Stone or Billboard securing sit-downs focused on reconciliation, his appearances on live streams and informal platforms told a different story. In a November 2024 XQC Kickstream, Drake stated, "Here, as you can see, fully intact, mind, body, and soul, in case you are wondering." Right. Mind, body, and soul. Mind, body, and soul. You need facts to take me out. Fairy tales won't do it. While these words maintained his defiant stance, this defensive reflection positioned him as unbothered and surviving the beef, hinting at closure without apology, with fans interpreting it as him declaring the feud ineffective against him. Perhaps most tellingly, during an October 2024 fan interaction in Toronto amid ongoing fallout, Drake spoke about betrayal and fake friends, alluding to celebrities siding with Lamar. While critical, he emphasized personal growth, saying he was holding people accountable, but focused on his circle, implying a shift away from active beefing. Even in his concert performances throughout 2025, we witnessed this internal struggle between maintaining his reputation and genuinely wanting to move past the conflict. During UK shows in early 2025, fans chanted, F***Kendrick, and Drake responded, with just a smile, "I'm here for nobody. Only Drake. I'm here for y'all tonight. Matter of fact, you know what? It's non-existent. Just, hey man, you got to slurp. I need that change, yes." Applause. However, what was equally significant was how in other sets he altered lyrics from more aggressive versions to something milder, suggesting de-escalation to avoid reigniting. The evidence mounted throughout this period that Drake was sending increasingly clear signals about his desire to end the hostilities. These signals of wanting to end the beef were more about self-preservation and redirection than reconciliation, with no public olive branches like J. Cole's 2024 apology. His approach was strategic, allowing him to maintain face while gradually stepping away from the conflict that had consumed so much of his creative energy and public persona. What we were witnessing was unprecedented in modern hip-hop. A major artist essentially admitting defeat, not through direct surrender, but through a carefully orchestrated campaign of de-escalation and redirection. Drake's transformation from aggressive combatant to someone desperate for peace wasn't happening in press conferences or formal statements, but through the very medium that had started the war in the first place, his music. When the King of Toronto realized he'd lost. The roots of this realization trace back to the very beginning of their conflict, long before the explosive 2024 exchanges that would define their rivalry for generations. The conflict began as subtle competitive jabs, but escalated into a full-blown exchange of diss tracks in 2024, involving personal allegations, cultural critiques, and legal actions. What started as friendly competition between two of hip-hop's brightest stars had morphed into something far more sinister and personally destructive than either artist had initially anticipated. Early collaborations fostered positivity. In 2011, Lamar featured on Drake's Buried Alive interlude from the album Take Care, where he delivered a 2-minute verse praising Drake's influence. Irony wasn't lost on anyone who followed their journey. The same artist who had once celebrated Drake's genuine soul and clicked with him immediately would later become the architect of what many considered the most thorough dismantling of a rap superstar in hip-hop history. The sparking event occurred on August 14, 2013, with Lamar's verse on Big Sean's Control. Lamar name-dropped Drake and others, declaring, "I got love for you all, but I'm trying to murder you," framing it as a competitive challenge to elevate the genre. At the time, Drake's response seemed measured and confident. He responded in a Billboard interview by dismissing it as an ambitious thought and insisting Lamar wasn't murdering him on any platform. But looking back with the benefit of hindsight, this moment represented the beginning of Drake's slow descent into a conflict he was never truly prepared to handle. The years that followed saw a gradual escalation that Drake seemed to embrace, even welcome. Prior to Control, subtle tensions existed, with some sources suggesting friction as early as 2012, when MTV ranked Lamar as the hottest MC, prompting Drake to diss the list on 5 a.m. in Toronto and Jody Freestyle. Drake appeared to relish these early exchanges, confident in his commercial dominance and global appeal. He had weathered storms before, most notably his devastating loss to Pushet in 2018, but had always managed to bounce back stronger than ever. However, the 2024 escalation revealed something different, something that suggested Drake had fundamentally misunderstood both his opponent and T.